Nice Mrs. Garcia. We followed Mr. Tushman down the few hallways. There weren't a lot of people around, and there were a few who were there didn't seem to notice me at all, though they may have been because they didn't see me. I was sort of hid behind my mom as I walked. I know that sounds kind of babyish of me, but I wasn't feeling very brave right then. We ended up in a small room with the words of the office and the middle school director on the door. Inside, there was a desk with a nice-seeming lady sitting behind it. "This is Mrs. Garcia," said Mr. Tushman. The lady smiled at my mom, took off her glasses, and got up out of her chair. My mother shook her hand and said, "Isabel Pullman, nice to meet you." "And this is August," Mr. Tushman said. My mom kind of stepped to the side a bit so I would move forward. Then that thing happened, when it happened a million times before. When I looked up at Mrs. Garcia's eyes dropped for a second. It was so fast that no one else would have noticed, since the rest of her face stayed exactly the same. She was smiling, a really shiny smile. "Such a pleasure to meet you, August," she said, holding her hand out to shake mine. "Hi," I finally said quietly, giving her my hand. I didn't want her to look at her face, so I kept staring at her glasses, which hung around a chain on her neck. "Wow, what a firm grip," said Mrs. Garcia. Her hand was really warm. "The kid's got a killer handshake," Mr. Tushman agreed, and everyone laughed above my head. "You can call me Mrs. G," said Mrs. Garcia. I think that was talking to me, but I was looking at all the stuff on her desk now. "That's what everyone else calls me, Mrs. G." "I forgot my combination, Mrs. G. I need a late pass, Mrs. G. I want to change my elective, Mrs. G." "Mrs. G actually is the one who runs this place," Mr. Tushman said, which made all of us grown-ups laugh again. "I'm here every morning by 7:30, Mrs. Garcia continued, looking at me while I stared at her brown sandals with small purple flowers on the buckles. "So if you ever need anything, August, I'm the one to ask. And you can ask me anything." "Okay," I mumbled. "Oh, look at that cute baby," Mom said, pointing to one of the photographs on Mrs. Garcia's bulletin board. "Is he yours?" "No, my goodness," said Mrs. Garcia, smiling. A big smile now that was totally different from her shiny smile. "You've just made my day. That's my grandson." "What a cutie," said Mom, shaking her head. "How old?" "Well, in that picture, he's just 5 months old, I think. But he's big now. Almost 8 years old." "Wow," said Mom, nodding and smiling. "Well, he is absolutely beautiful." "Thank you," said Mrs. Garcia, nodding, like she was about to say something else about her grandson. But then all of a sudden, her smile got a little smaller. "We are all going to take very good care of August," she said to Mom. And I saw her give Mom's hand a little squeeze. And I looked at Mom's face. I realized she was as nervous as I was. I guess I liked Mrs. Garcia when she wasn't wearing her shiny smile. Jack, Will, Julian, and Charlotte. We followed Mr. Tushman into a small room across the hall from Mrs. Garcia's desk. He was talking when he closed the door to his office and sat down behind a big desk, though I wasn't really paying any much attention to what he was saying. I was looking around all things on the desk, cool stuff, like a globe that floated in the air, like a Rubik's type cube that made with the little mirrors. I liked his office a lot. I liked that there were all these neat little drawings and paintings by students on the walls, framed like they were really important. My mom sat down in a chair in front of Mr. Tushman's desk, and even though there was another chair right next to hers, I decided to stand beside her. "Why do you have your own room and Mrs. G doesn't?" I said. "You mean, why do I have an office?" asked Mr. Tushman. "You said she runs the place," I said. "Oh, well," I was kind of kidding. "Mrs. G is my assistant." "Mr. Tushman is director of the middle school," Mom explained. "Do they call you Mr. T?" I asked, which made him smile. "Do you know who Mr. T is?" he answered. "I pity the fool," he said in a funny, tough voice, like he was imitating somebody. I had no idea what he was talking about. "Anyway, no," said Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. No one calls me Mr. T, though I have a feeling I'm called a lot of other names that I don't even want to know about. Let's face it, a name like mine is not easy to live with. You know what I mean? Here I have to admit I totally laughed because I knew exactly what he meant. My mom and dad had a teacher they called Miss Butt. I said, Augie, said Mom, but Mr. Tushman laughed. Now that's bad, said Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. I guess I shouldn't complain. Hey, so listen, August, here's what I thought we would do today. Is that a pumpkin? I asked, pointing to the framed picture behind Mr. Tushman's desk. Augie, sweetie, don't interrupt, said Mom. You like it? Said Mr. Tushman, turning around and looking at the painting. I do too, and I thought it was a pumpkin too, until the student who gave it to me explained to me that it is actually not a pumpkin. It is. Are you ready for this? It is a portrait of me. Now, August, I ask you, do I really look that much like a pumpkin? No, I answered, though I was thinking, kinda yes. Something about the way his cheeks puffed out when he smiled made him look like a jack-o'-lantern. Just as I thought that, it occurred to me how funny that was. Cheeks, Mr. Tushman, and I started laughing a little. I shook my head and covered my mouth with my hand. Mr. Tushman smiled like he could read my mind. I was about to say something else, but then all of a sudden I heard the voices outside his office. Kids' voices. I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but my heart literally started beating like I just had run the longest race of my life. The laughter I had inside me poured out of me. The thing is, when I was little, I never minded meeting new people or new kids because all kids I met were really little too. What's cool really about little kids is that they don't say stuff and they don't try to hurt your feelings. Even though sometimes they do say stuff that hurt your feelings, but they don't actually know what they're saying. Big kids, though, yeah, they know what they're saying. And that is definitely not fun for me. One of the reasons I grew my hair long last year was so I could have my bangs cover my eyes. It helps me block out all the things I don't want to see. Mrs. Garcia knocked on the door and poked her head inside. They're here, Mr. Tushman, she said. Who's here? I said. Thanks, said Mr. Tushman to Mrs. Garcia. August, I thought it would be a good idea for you to meet some students who'll be in your homeroom this year. I figure they could take you on a tour, show you the school a little bit, show you the lay of the land, so to speak. I don't want to meet anyone, I said to Mom. Mr. Tushman suddenly, right in front of me, his hands on my shoulders, he leaned down and said very softly in my ear, It'll be okay, August. These are nice kids, I promise. You're going to be okay, Augie, Mom whispered with all her might. But before she could say anything else, Mr. Tushman opened the office door. Come on in, kids, he said, and he walked. 2 boys and a girl. None of them looked at me or Mom. They just stood by the door looking straight at Mr. Tushman like their lives depended on it. Thanks so much for coming, guys, especially since school doesn't start till next month, said Mr. Tushman. Have you had a good summer? All of them nodded, but no one said anything. Great, said Mr. Tushman. So, guys, I wanted you to meet August, who's going to be a new student here this year. August, these guys have been students at Beecher Prep since kindergarten, though. Of course, they were in a lower school building, but they all know the ins and outs of the middle school program. And since you're all in the same homeroom, I thought it would be a good idea to get each other to know a little before school started, okay? So, kids, this is August. August, this is Jack Will. Jack Will looked at me, put out his hand. When I shook it, he kind of half smiled and said, Hey. And he looked down really fast. This is Julian, said Mr. Tushman. Hey, said Julian. He did the same thing as Jack. I took my hand, forced a smile, and looked down fast. And Charlotte, said Mr. Tushman. Charlotte had the blondest hair I've ever seen. She didn't shake my hand, but she gave me a quick little wave and smiled. Hi, August. Nice to meet you, she said. Hi, I said and looked down. She was wearing bright green Crocs. So, said Mr. Tushman, putting his hands together in kind of a slow clap, I thought you guys would like to take August on a little tour of the school. Maybe you could start in the 3rd floor? That's where your homeroom class is going to be, room 301. I think. Mrs. G is room 301, Mrs. Garcia called from the front other room. Room 301, Mr. Tushman nodded. And then you can show August the science labs, the computer room, and then you can work your way to the library and the performance space on the second floor, and then take him to the cafeteria, of course. Should we take him to the music room? Asked Julian. Good idea, yes, said Mr. Tushman. August, do you play any instruments? No, I said. It wasn't my favorite subject on the account of my face, that I don't really have ears. Well, I do, but they don't exactly look like normal ears. Well, you may enjoy some music in the music room anyway, said Mr. Tushman. We have a very nice selection of percussion instruments. August, you've been waiting to learn to play the drums, Mom said, trying to get me to look at her, but her eyes were covered by my bangs, and I stared at a piece of old gum that was stuck on the bottom of Mrs. Tushman's desk. Great. Okay. Why don't you guys get going? Said Mr. Tushman. Just be back in here, he looked at Mom, half an hour, okay? I think Mom nodded. So, it's okay with you, August? He asked me. I didn't answer. Is it okay, August? Mom repeated. I looked at her now. I wanted her to see how mad I was, but then I saw her face, and she just nodded and seemed more scared than I was. The other kids started out the door, and I followed them. See you soon, said Mom, her voice sounding a little higher than normal. I didn't answer her. The grand tour. Jack, Will, Julian, and Charlotte and I went down the big hallway to some wide staircase. No one said a word. We walked up to the third floor. We got to the top of the stairs. We went to the little halfway full of lots of doors. Julian opened the door to 301. This is our homeroom, he said, standing in front of the half-open door. We have Mrs. Petosa, he said. She's okay, at least for her homeroom. I heard she's really strict if you get her for math, though. That's not true, said Charlotte. My sister had her last year and said she was really nice. Not that I heard, answered Julian, but whatever. He closed the door and continued walking down the hallway. This is the science lab, he said. And we're going to the next door. And just like that, he did it 2 seconds ago. He stood in front of a half-open door, talking. He didn't look at me. And once he talked, he was okay because I wasn't looking at him either. You won't know who you have as a science teacher until the first day, but you want to get Mr. Holler. He used to be in the lower school. He would play his giant tuba in his class. It was a baritone horn, said Charlotte. It was a tuba, answered Julian, closing the door. Dude, let him go inside so he can check it out, Jack Will told him, pushing past Julian and opening the door. Go inside if you want, Julian said. It was his first time he looked at me. I shrugged, walked over to the door. Julian moved out of the way quickly, as if he was afraid I might accidentally touch him or something. Nothing much to see, Julian said, walking in after me. He started pointing out a bunch of stuff around the room. That's the incubator. That big black thing is a chalkboard. There are desks. There are chairs. There are Bunsen burners. There is a gross science poster. This is chalk. This is an eraser. I'm sure he knows what an eraser is, Charlotte said, sounding a little like Via. How would I know what he knows? Julian answered. Mr. Tushman said he's never been to a school before. You know what an eraser is, right? Charlotte asked me. I admit, I was feeling so nervous that I didn't know what to say or expect. I just looked at the floor. Hey, you can talk, asked Jack Will. Yeah. I nodded. I still really hadn't looked at any of them, not directly. You know what an eraser is, right? Asked Jack. Well, of course, I mumbled. I told you. There was nothing here to see, said Julian, shrugging. I have a question, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What exactly is homeroom? Is that like a subject? No, that's your group, explained Charlotte, ignoring Julian's smirk. It's like when you go to school in the morning, your homeroom teacher takes attendance and stuff like that. In a way, like your main class, even though it's not really a class. I mean, it's a class, but I think he gets it, Charlotte, said Jack Will. Do you get it? Charlotte asked me. Yeah, I nodded at her. Okay, let's get out of here, said Jack Will, walking away. Wait, Jack, we're supposed to be answering questions, said Charlotte. Jack Will rolled his eyes and he turned around. Do you have any more questions? He asked. No, I answered. Oh, well, actually, yes. Is your name Jack or Jack Will? Jack is my first name. Will is my last name. Oh, because Mr. Tushman introduced you as Jack Will. So I thought, ha! You thought his name was Jack Will? Laughed Julian. Yeah, some people call me by my first name, Jack. He shrugged. I don't know why. Anyways, can we go now? Let's go to the performance space next, said Charlotte, leading the way out of the science room. It's very cool. You'll like it, August. The performance space. Charlotte basically didn't stop talking and headed down the second floor. She was describing the play they put on last year it was Oliver. She played Oliver even though she's a girl, and she said this pushed open the double door to the huge auditorium. On the other side of the room was a stage. Charlotte started skipping towards the stage. Julian ran after her, and they turned around halfway down the aisle. Come on, he said loudly, waving his arms at me to follow him, which I did. There were like hundreds of people in the audience that night, said Charlotte. It took me a second to realize what she was talking about. Oliver. I was so nervous. I had so many lines, and I had all these songs in my head, and it was so hard. Although she was talking to me, I really she didn't look at me much. And opening night, my parents, they were all the way in the back of the auditorium like Jack is right now. But when the lights were off, you can really see far back. So I was like, where are my parents? Where are my parents? And Mr. Resnick, our theater arts teacher last year, he said, Charlotte, stop being such a diva. And I was like, okay. And then I spotted my parents, and I was totally fine. I didn't forget a single line after that. While she was talking, I noticed Julian staring at me out of the corner of my eye. There's something I see that people do a lot with me. They think I don't know they're staring, but I can tell, the way their heads tilted. I turned around to see where Jack had gone, and he stayed at the back of the auditorium like he was bored. We put on the play every year, said Charlotte. I don't think he's going to want to be in the school play, Charlotte, said Julian sarcastically. You can be in the play without actually being in the play, Charlotte answered, looking at me. You can do lighting, and you can paint the backdrops. Oh, yeah, whoopee, said Julian, twirling his finger in the air. But you don't have to take on theater arts elective if you don't want to, Charlotte said, shrugging. There's dance, or chorus, or band. There's leadership. Only dorks do leadership, Julian interrupted. Julian, you are being so obnoxious, said Charlotte, which made Julian laugh. I'm taking the science elective, I said. Cool, said Charlotte. Julian looked directly at me. The science elective is supposedly the hardest elective of all, he said. No offense, but if you've never ever been to school before, why do you think you suddenly can be smart enough to go to the science elective? I mean, have you ever even studied science before? Like, real science? Like, not the kind that you do in kits? Yeah, I nodded. He was homeschooled, Julian, said Charlotte. So teachers come to his house? Asked Julian, looking puzzled. No, his mother taught him, answered Charlotte. Is she a teacher? Julian asked. Is your mother a teacher? Charlotte asked me. No, I said. No, she's not a real teacher, said Julian, and if that proves my point. That's what I mean. How can someone who's not a real teacher actually teach science? I'm sure you'll do fine, Charlotte said, looking at me. Let's go to the library now, Jack called out, sounding really bored. Why is your hair so long? Julian asked me. He sounded like he was annoyed. I didn't know what to say, so I shrugged. Can I ask you a question? He asked. I shrugged again. Didn't he just ask me a question? What's the deal with your face, man? I mean, were you in a fire or something? Julian, that's so rude, said Charlotte. Not being rude, said Julian. I just am asking a question. Mr. Tushman said we could ask questions if we wanted to. Not rude questions like that, said Charlotte. Besides, he was born like that. That's what Mr. Tushman said. You just weren't listening. I was so listening, said Julian. I just thought maybe he was in a fire, too. Jeez, Julian, said Jack. Just shut up. You shut up, Julian yelled. Come on, August, said Jack. Let's go to the library already. I walked towards Jack and followed him out of the auditorium. He held the double doors open for me, and I passed by. He looked me right in the face, kind of daring me to look back at him, which I did. Then I actually smiled. I don't know, sometimes when I have the feeling that I'm about to cry, it can turn into almost laughing feeling. And that must have been the feeling I was having because I smiled. I almost like I was going to giggle. The thing is, because of the way my face is, people who don't know me very well don't always get that. I'm smiling. My mouth doesn't go up in the corners the way other people's mouths do. It goes in a straight line across my face. But somehow Jack Will got that I just smiled at him, and he smiled back. Julian's a jerk, he whispered before Julian and Charlotte reached us. But, dude, you're gonna have to talk. He said this seriously, like he was trying to help me. And I nodded to Julian. And Charlotte caught up with us. We were about quiet for a second, all of a sudden, nodding, looking at the floor. Then I looked up at Julian. The word supposedly, by the way, I said. What are you talking about? You said supposedly before, I said. I did not. Yeah, you did, Charlotte nodded. You did. You said the science elective was supposedly really hard. I heard you. I absolutely did not, he insisted. Whatever, said Jack. Let's just go. Yeah, let's just go, agreed Charlotte. Following Jack down the stairs to the next floor, I started to follow her, but Julian cut right in front of me, which actually made me stumble backwards. Oops, sorry about that, said Julian. But I could tell from the way he looked down at me that he wasn't sorry at all. The deal. Mom and Mr. Tushman were talking about when I got back to the office. Mrs. Garcia was the first to see us come back, and she started smiling her shiny smile again as we walked in. So, August, what did you think? Did you like what you saw? She asked. Yeah. I nodded, looking over at Mom. Jack, Julian, and Charlotte were standing by the door, not sure what to go or what to do if they were still needed. I wondered what else they would be told about me before they'd met me. Did you see the baby chick? Mom asked me. As I shook my head, Julian said, Are you talking about the baby chicks in science? Those get donated to the farm at the end of the school year. Oh, said Mom, disappointed. But they hatch new ones every year in science, Julian added. So August will be able to see them again in the spring. Oh, good, Mom said, eyeing me. They're so cute, August. I wish she would talk to me like I was a baby in front of other people. So, August, said Mr. Tushman, did these guys show you enough around? Did you want to see more? I realized I forgot to ask you to show you the gym. We did anyways, Mr. Tushman, said Julian. Excellent, said Mr. Tushman. And I told them about the school play and some of the electives, said Charlotte. Oh, no, she said suddenly. We forgot to show him the art room. That's okay, said Mr. Tushman. But we can show him that now, Charlotte offered. Don't we have to pick Via up soon, I said to Mom. That was our signal for telling Mom if I really wanted to leave. Oh, you're right, said Mom, getting up. I could tell she was pretending to check her time on her watch. I'm sorry, everybody. I lost track of time. We have to go pick up my daughter at her new school. She's taking an unofficial tour today. This part wasn't a lie, and Via was checking out a new school today. The part was a lie that we were picking her up at the school, which we weren't, since she was coming home with Dad later. Where does she go to school? Asked Mr. Tushman, getting up. She's starting at Faulkner High School this fall. Wow, that's not an easy school to get into. Good for her. Thank you, Mom said, nodding. It'll be a bit of a schlep, though. The A train down to 86 and down across town, bus all the way to East Side, take an hour that way, but it's just a 15-minute drive. It'll be worth it. I know a couple kids who go into the Faulkner, and they love it, said Mr. Tushman. We should really go, Mom, I said, tugging at her pocketbook, and we all said goodbye, kind of quickly after that. I think Mr. Tushman even was a little surprised that we were leaving so suddenly, and then I wondered if he would blame Jack or Charlotte, even though it wasn't really. Julian was the only one who made me feel kind of bad. Everyone was really nice, I made sure to tell Mr. Tushman before we left. I look forward to having you as a student, said Mr. Tushman, patting my back. Bye, I said to Jack, Charlotte, and Julian, but I didn't look at them, or look up at all, until I left the building.